where I was walking, which meant it was low tide and there were vast mud flats. They were very romantic to look at, and I took pictures of an old rotting ship that was beached, covered in moss and lichen, who knows how old. And there were the curlews skittering across the mud, poking their long beaks, their proboscises into the sand. Very appealing view. And then I read a sign, "Do not go onto the flats. It is poisoned with lead." Industrial Britain had refined lead and other metals along the River Tyne for generations. And though the factories were now gone, even obliterated, the metals still clung to the earth itself. It didn't stop the birds, but it reminded me that sometimes the view that looks to us so haunting and natural is anything but. I began to look not with the eyes of the innocent, but of the wise. Around several bends, after passing more warehouses on one side of the river or the other, the city of Newcastle came into view, a city twice the size of Grand Rapids, astride a river more than twice as wide, with bridges bigger and more noble than ours. I was impressed. A town has been here since Roman times, though the oldest part of it is the ruins of a castle on a hill. It was mostly hidden now by the new burgeoning rebirth of a city that had given up its coal and shipbuilding for arts, sports, and technology. It was a good-looking town. And in fact, I stopped at an old flower warehouse that had been recommissioned as the Baltic Institute, or a Center for Contemporary Art, and spent a half an hour listening to a sound art installation that was utterly captivating. And then I had lunch. And then I kept walking. And as I went west of the city, the path became more like a park, and then eventually it became an actual path. And I was walking through the fields, and lo and behold, and I like to say lo and behold when talking about cattle, I saw cows. I would be seeing a lot of cows. But these were the first, and they were novel at the moment, along with the occasional horse. And as I'm walking down this pathway, this beautiful bowered pathway, bikers still going there, the occasional neighbor walking her dog. In fact, there was a woman walking 3 dogs, 2 poodles and a hound. And the hound bounded off into the wilderness around us, disappeared into the underbrush, and came back with a dead rabbit in its chewing maw. And I knew that the rabbit had not been dead for more than moments. I was in the countryside. And finally, as I headed to my bed and breakfast of the night in the little town of Wylam, I found myself passing a little white house, the kind that you see on postcards, the kind out of which gnomes should come, from which the smoke of peat fires rise. And on it was a plaque, and the plaque said, "This is the birthplace of George Stephenson." And I thought exactly what you thought this moment. Who? But George Stephenson was an inventor, and he invented the first practical steam locomotive. In other words, the Industrial Revolution started in a house in the woods, surrounded by green and cattle and curlews walking upon the bank. Now, I'm going to make a change of scene. I was going to have you see a portion of The Wizard of Oz, but technology is apparently as dissenting as politicians these days. Now, you have a choice. Shall I just recite the words to the song, or shall I sing them? All right, thank you. Thank you. Which means I'm going to need enough light that I can read the music. Yay. See, we do make plans around here, but as I am fond of saying, Man plans, God laughs. And let's see if I can play this for you, because this was supposed to work 20 minutes before church. And so I printed the music. Let's see if I can make this happen. You can come along for the ride if you'd like. Let's see. In Christian scripture, I just made a mistake. I left all my notes down there. That redoubles what I'm going to say. Marilyn, could you give me a hand? In Christian scripture, in the book of Corinthians, Paul famously says, I'm a fool for Christ's sake. Well, I'm not sure if I would say it exactly right like that, but you could say, for Christ's sake, he's a fool. But I am willing to be a fool if it pulls you into the thought of whether we actually have brains. That's part of the Wizard of Oz story, is these metaphors of creatures feeling a lack of something essential, a brain, a heart, the nerve. And you were waiting to hear that anyway, I know you were, because that's the title of the sermon. So I owed you at least that much, even in its shabbier form. Another good reason for us to update our technology. Gary Dorian, I want to tell you about a guy with a brain. Gary Dorian is a professor of Christian history at the Union Theological Seminary in New York, and formerly of Kalamazoo College, so we know each other. We at Fountain Street Church. In fact, I met him here. He wrote a mammoth 3-volume work about the history of liberal theology, and he sets forth his thesis that liberal theology is an attempt to bridge the widening gap in the 19th century between Christian belief and modern science and reality. Liberal religion really does believe that biblical phrase, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. And as science and reason kept uncovering disturbing facts that didn't square with the Bible, people drew onto one of two sides. It's the Bible and the rest of you are idiots. Or it's science and the rest of you are fools. And of course, liberal religion stands in the crossfire, which is why there are so few of us. It's easier to take an extreme point of view than to take a moderate one. And the reality is that the liberal religious point of view is not a radical one. It's an attempt to mediate the urge of faith and the need of realism. And it may, in fact, seem to be doomed to failure, but for some reason we stick with it. And in fact, a century ago, in some ways, it had actually succeeded. A century ago, Charles Darwin made it into our stained glass window, and we were not the only church to think so. And yet, here we are, a century later, apparently going backward in time, as not a reputable Christian would appear to be okay with Darwin or most of the reality most of us know to be true. I guess the march of time is not always forward. But this, too, I should now tell you, is part of the journey of any community of faith. You make progress, and then you have defeats. You have retreats as well as advances, and victories as well as setbacks. And maybe in the larger journey of liberal religion, this is a step that must be made, but it is hard sometimes to take the bigger view. And yet we here at Fountain Street Church have been practicing liberal religion in a particular way as well. It was put together, this church, from other Baptist churches in 1869, and it was a bastion of orthodoxy. You couldn't get more Christian, more Baptist, more holy than us, except when we argued with each other about which part of the church was holier than the other part. They did that, you know. That's the trouble with Fountain Street Church. It was born of two churches that each accused the other of being backsliders. But they got together and decided we'll just make it one big unhappy family instead. But half a century later, in 1919, Darwin is not only accepted, he's not yet in the window. That took until the 1920s. But the minister at the time, Alfred Wesley Wishart, invited Clarence Darrow, the defender of the Scopes in the Scopes trial, the most out-in-front agnostic, quasi-atheist, evolutionary speaker of the age. He invited him to come and speak at Fountain Street.